Disclaimer, no content from the movie aside from the cover will be provided in this video. To best vibe check what I'm even talking about, watch the trailer I've selected in the description below, then come back here. Okay, hopefully you've done that now. With that said, two videos in, these are the two I mean, I'm already breaking formula a little bit. Okay guys, recently I have rewatched a movie because it re-entered my consciousness. And it's called Tenet. Now you might think, what does that title even mean? Don't worry about that. And if you are willing to accept that off-rip, this movie will already be a lot easier to take in. If you do need to know what that means, oh boy, where do we begin? Tenet is a science fantasy heist movie. Science is for the aspects that are meant to make sense. They have this whole explanation of the logic of things being inverted, and it does kind of make sense. But fantasy is to be willing to excuse those elements when you really cannot process. You're like, okay, there's probably a logic to this, but you just can't fully consume it. So we're going to put fantasy in there, so you'll probably be more willing to let some of that go. Because if you go strictly on science, like it has to make sense logically. You will fail at some point in this movie. And it might be in like my top 10 films of all time. I'm not a huge film buff, that's why this is meant to be more of a video game channel. But God, if it's so hard for me to let this movie get out of my head. Recently, there was a video by this guy. I highly recommend watching this after you've seen the movie once, maybe even twice. But, God, I saw it like months ago last year, then it entered my head, and I'm just like, I want to see Tenet again. Then I bought the Blu-ray, then I watched it, and oh my God, it's just so much fun. And what's amazing about Tenet is that a lot of its greatest qualities are visible within those first 10 minutes. AKA, if you didn't click on the link in the description, now's the time, then come right back. It's not that long. The acting by John David Washington, who genuinely I thought was a joke, but no, he is the son of Denzel Washington, is mesmerizing. His physicality while moving throughout an action scene is so stylized in a way that I don't know how to describe it. It's like a mix of a soldier with such control and finesse of someone that was like, not in like a kung fu movie. I don't know, but somehow balances this thing where you see some very brutal action, but he immediately kind of snaps back into shape. But it doesn't feel brutal, it just feels like someone who really knows how to fight. And it's an edge that I'm failing to put words to. He moves around a scene with such force that I have truly not seen in a movie. The musical soundscape is incredible. These repetitive and complex synths, just the composition of it, the way it just hits you, it shakes you down and holds you, but like not in an oppressive sort of way, but this sort of impossible to escape feeling. And seeing the actors in these scenes kind of take control of various events, you just feel like they have so much more of a grip on things than you do, and you feel like you're out of your league. I don't think it will feel totally accurate in the clip, but once you get into like the sci-fantasy part of it, like once it's explained that, it will very quickly settle in. The budget and the visuals are also great, which I don't know if all of that will be shown here in terms of the color side of how vibrant it is, but the widescreen shots, how each frame is shot to be its most action-oriented, and it only gets even more engaging. And also at this point, the plot's great. And you don't necessarily know a ton about it, but that's kind of what's working. It's hinting at this wider conspiracy while also keeping you in the moment. You can't ponder like, oh, what's happening? You kind of just have to accept something strange is going on, and then that clashes with your thoughts of, oh, what's happening? To, oh, that crazy thing just happened. To, oh, that guy just got shot. And it's this blend that it doesn't let you go until it lets you breathe. And then once you can get into that, you can really start thinking. Now, with all of that said, that is what I would describe that you could really get out of the clip in the description, or if for some reason it gets taken down, the general introductory 10 minutes of the movie. Here is a fact, though, that I have to be honest with you guys about. I went into this movie having seen Memento, Inception, and I think that might be it. I guess technically Dark Knight, but I'm not going to count that in that roundup. So I'm also a bit used to this style by now, especially with Memento and Inception both being within the last 2 years. Wow, that's crazy to think about. For people that haven't seen those movies, or maybe haven't seen the sort of more fantastical movie, but also blending it with real life, that's not like a flat out Marvel movie, I can probably imagine that a lot of what I'm loving about it immediately might take time for more people to adjust. So I actually will recommend watching, more specifically, Inception. But if you want to get like the full Valentine bracing experience, watch Memento and Inception. If you love both of those movies after seeing them, I don't see you having a problem with Tenet. They are different films, but Inception allows the more scientific fantasy side to be a little bit more digestible in the Christopher Nolan style. And I think Memento is, oddly enough, a really good precursor to what this movie is going to be. Now, whatever order you want to see that in, that doesn't matter. But getting yourself established with Christopher Nolan, his writing style, but also his choices of where he kind of blends reality, will really help this sort of experience go off without a hitch. If you're not wanting to watch any spoilers, pause now and return later. It's worth it. Just trust me. Please! Hey there, you're on the other side of it now. We've gone through the machine, effectively, in this video, which, now that you've seen the movie, that should make perfect sense to you, as the entire movie makes perfect sense, obviously. But let's just get into some specific things I love about Tenet. Robert Pattinson's performance of Neil is one of the most engaging friendship roles I've ever seen in a movie. You see a lot of friendships, and you kind of just pass them off in either books or movies or TV shows when they're kind of done okay, only really notable when they are those special moments. And in this movie, God, is it a special moment. You kind of always am watching him with this air of curiosity in that there's something going on. But he always doesn't really question the protagonist as you follow him and his plans. So the twist is really able to be kind of hidden under the layer of secret people doing secret jobs. But at one point, Neil says something along the lines of, "We made the rules." And you can see a genuine joy in him that's like playful and kind of that he's letting things go a bit. And as he says at the end of the movie, he thought he would have guessed by this point that that was the sort of twist. So he kind of loosens up by the time he's like, well, okay, there's not really much to surprise you with anymore. The choice of this movie to really focus on Chekhov's gun principle, where setup and payoff may seem like a gimme, but God, the amount of them is incredible, and hiding it in this sci-fantasy aspect works well too. Your mind doesn't go to thinking about how the payoff is going to land, it's thinking, what the hell is going on? That results in payoffs hitting more like puzzle pieces. The picture gradually gets more clear, but you're still a ways off from seeing it accurately. The whole scene at the Freeport, as you watch it going on, you know by this point that the movie is about inversion, so you're kind of like, oh, okay, so they're going to explain this at some point to see maybe who's fighting me in reverse time period. I guess it's going to be all right because the movie keeps going, but learning it is the protagonist fighting himself, and in a way he's protecting both versions of himself, now that's a payoff. You know something's coming, but the way it comes at you, and the way that you know that if you look into some behind the scenes, how the scene was shot, it's insane, and there's many of those. Learning during the opera siege that when you see the little pendant, that one, it's referenced near the end of the movie when Neil unfortunately bites the bullet, and also Neil, from the protagonist, learning that, oh, the guy that died in the last scene is Neil, but if you watch the movie again, you also see that Neil was from the very beginning. It's so dope. It's hard not to love this movie if you can appreciate things like that. And also, all that aside, for a movie about these complex plot lines, the pacing is just great. I've rewatched this movie a couple times just in preparation for this video, and when I originally said, oh, everything that you can love about Tenet's in the first 10 minutes, the movie really, like, every 10 minutes kind of goes on by, maybe, like, in between Act 1 and Act 2 being the slowest part. But it really just introduces something to you, they go to a different place, then they go to a different place, then they go to a different place. And it really keeps up a great, like, there's not really much kind of, oh no, they're talking too much about how the world works. No, it kind of just keeps going at an impeccable pace. And if you're into what's going on, it's great. And also on a second viewing, you get to see every domino placed and also be unplaced, I guess we're speaking about inversion. Once again, Nostalgiac's video on it puts us in a very clear lens. This movie consists of what I could only phrase as live-action anime fights, with choreography that no one would dare, with twists that only anime could usually get away with, but I think Christopher Nolan really hits that line. And also, never really losing the feeling of stakes due to a really good argument that Neil and the protagonist have, I think, after or right before the reverse half of the Freeport heist. Us being alive right now, doesn't that mean we win? And you do see that they end up winning, but in a weird way, Neil's like, we can't imagine what not existing is like. So we might just need to get there so we experience it. But we aren't there unless we get there. With him repeating his popular expression, what's happened's happened. It's just all interesting. And also, given this is the same guy that made Memento, this sort of thing, if anyone was going to do it, it'd be the man who made Memento. But it's still impressive. Also, I don't think there's enough credit given to specifically the actor and the villain of Andre Sator. He's not, like, compelling wouldn't be the right word, but he really works well in a spy thriller context because even though he has mastermind aspects to him, if you remove like the time inversion flip, you feel like he would just be kind of just the piece of shit kind of character. But because of how the story pulls together the reasoning on why he has this intelligence in the back of his hand, it's a weird but also nice balance. He isn't like particularly intelligent himself, but the tracks seem to be kind of laid down for him to work, and you see that kind of be intertwined. As they said, he was the right man at the right time, but that's all he is. A money-hungry bystander that got very lucky, then tied into a conspiracy. But you do see his own manipulative tactics to the point where he seems to have more respect for the protagonist than his own wife. You're sold on this being a man to beat, but also gets sold on why Priya's mentality towards the mission sucks too. Priya being a pretty effective anti-hero sort of role in this situation. It's fair, but you never also get this feeling that Priya is worth trusting. You do it because you have to, which I think works, because very early on, the protagonist says to who he thought was Priya, you're an arms dealer, this would be the easiest trigger I ever needed to pull. But because Priya has this importance here, it's almost like Priya is like a second half of the protagonist's test. Like, hey, she's not great either. You have to take out more than just the big threat. There are other threats in the world that you have to prevent. And with the core mission succeeding, now it's kind of like working your way backwards. As Neil technically ends his part of the mission, the protagonist goes in the past, or sets up the reverse domino blocks to make sure everything works on the future side of history, even though that's even kind of hard to say, to be honest. The dialogue is also very snappy. John David Washington really sells you as the protagonist. He's a normal guy, but also works these secret operations. It feels both grounded and still elevated by the genre it's in. You feel like the same intensity would be there, but given the stakes, given all the stuff that happens to him, it's just, I think he's a great actor, and I'm almost sad in a way that we might not see another performance from him, at least of this scale. Honestly, I just hope Nolan pulls him out again, because I think he'd be great working with like Samuel L. Jackson in some sort of movie, or Jamie Foxx, or maybe I'm thinking of Tarantino. Anyway, just he's a great actor, and I want to see him in better movies. As my conclusion, well, first off, I realized I think I'm going to do more spoiler talks because I liked having a chance to get into the movie. And it also allows me to do more of what I wanted to do with this whole channel and these videos is I want to recommend these things to you, but I don't want to spell out the experience for you. But for the Lies of P video, I didn't think it made sense to explain excessive game mechanics that I think are just cool enough to figure out on your own. But for a movie like Tenet, I don't know if people would watch it, so I do want to give the upfront sell that it's worth it, kind of like what I did with both the finals and Lies of P. I want to have this fine balance between giving a genuine recommendation, but I also don't want to. I always want to have a spoiler half where I'm kind of just explaining what makes certain things dope. I kind of want I want to talk to two audiences: the people that haven't seen the thing, and the people that have seen the thing and just want to hear like a recollection of just isn't this cool? Isn't this so sick? And like I want people that to be able to have these discussions, but I also want them to know that hey, I don't want it to just be for one audience or the other. I want both people to be able to come to this video and have their moments. But if you're watching at this point, hopefully you've considered seeing the movie or have seen it. Which side of that do you live on? Maybe you live in the time that you haven't seen the movie yet. Maybe you will see the movie, and then you're going to live in the time that you have seen the movie, but from my own recommendation, or maybe you have already seen it, so you kind of just watch the whole thing knowing that. And then there's that other timeline where you never I didn't even make the channel yet. It's a complicated thing to think about. But after all, we do live in a Twilight world.